Hello, friends, and welcome to episode 1245 of the Juicebox Podcast. Erika Forsyth is back with me for part 3 of the Resilience series. And don't forget, to learn more about Erika, you only have to go to erikaforsyth.com. Nothing you hear on the Juicebox Podcast should be considered advice, medical or otherwise. Always consult a physician before making any changes to your healthcare plan. If you have type 1 diabetes or are the caregiver of someone with type 1 and a U.S. resident, you have a unique opportunity to make a significant impact on type 1 diabetes research right from your home in fewer than 10 minutes. Just go to t1dexchange.org/juicebox and complete the survey. That's all you have to do. When you place your first order for AG1 with my link, you'll get 5 free travel packs and a free year's supply of vitamin D. drinkag1.com/juicebox. Hey, you like being comfortable? Do you like looking good? If you do, go to CozyEarth.com. Fill up your carts with towels and sheets and clothing and all the things that will make you happy. And then use the offer code JUICEBOX at checkout and you will save 30% off of everything in that cart. CozyEarth.com. Use the offer code JUICEBOX at checkout. This episode of the Juicebox Podcast is sponsored by US Med. usmed.com/juicebox or call 888-721-1514. US Med is where my daughter gets her diabetes supplies from, and you could too. Use the link or number to get your free benefits check and get started today with US Med. This episode of the Juicebox Podcast is sponsored by the Dexcom G7, made for all types of diabetes. Dexcom G7 can be used to manage type 1, type 2, and gestational diabetes. You're going to see the speed, direction, and number of your blood sugar right on your receiver or smartphone device. Dexcom.com/juicebox. This episode of the Juicebox Podcast is sponsored by the only implantable sensor rated for long-term wear, up to 6 months, the Eversense CGM. EversenseCGM.com/juicebox. Erika, we are back to do the third installment of our resilience conversation. How are you?
That's right. I'm well, thank you.
Excellent.
Yes. I have to keep reminding myself that the overarching theme is resilience, because I know we're focusing a lot on trauma, but it's all connected.
If people listen to the podcast long enough, they'll recognize that my titles are not that meaningful sometimes. But I also think that resilience just leads into the conversation. You know what I mean? Like, I reached out to you and I said, can we talk about resilience? That's all I said. Mm-hmm. And you came back with all this great content and these things to pick through, you know, what you found and what you knew, you know, which I didn't know, because I think this was just the thing I thought of while I was in the shower, if I'm remembering correctly, is that, you know, this part about trauma that we discussed in the last episode, and I guess we'll kind of continue on with today as well. Is that right?
Yes. I was thinking today we could do a little bit of review and reflection and then start talking a little bit more about the connection of privilege and resilience that also connects to, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the ACEs today if we have time.
So I want to hear all about that, but let me ask you this. I think that it's possible that when you use the word privilege, you scare people and they're looking for the stop button already. They're like, I don't need to be told I have privilege. So like, I'm interested in how that unfolds. And I hope people like take a minute and listen so that they can see the bigger picture. You don't just mean, I don't want to tell you what you mean. So do your review and then you ask.
Yes, I know that word has a lot of connotation and association. And what we'll get into is kind of thinking of maybe the better question to think about is, did you feel safe and secure growing up? Which can be thought of as a certain form of privilege. Mm-hmm. Or do you currently feel safe and secure? And so we'll talk about how that is connected to your stress response system and whether or not you had opportunities to develop resilience as a young person.
Yeah, because in context, privilege is opportunity to be safe, to be protected, to be loved, that kind of stuff.
And predictability.
Mm-hmm.
an opportunity, minimal threat, and you experience stress and chaos. You still experience it, but it's in a predictable, controllable, manageable way.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. You said you wanted to look back a little bit before moving forward.
I just thought we could review a little bit of what we talked about in the last couple episodes of the kind of capital T trauma, which is understanding what is trauma. We look at the event itself. How did you experience the event? And then did you have any long-lasting effects of that event? And if you are experiencing traumatic symptoms, which I don't even know if we actually talked about last time, but if you are wondering if you are living from a traumatic or experiencing a traumatic event or have in the past or continuing to, the symptoms might feel and look very similar to depression or anxiety. Some of them, having flashbacks, intrusive memories, exhaustion, fatigue, anxiety, depression, changes in appetite, changes in sleeping, irritable mood swings. You might be numbing by alcohol or other drugs, or other even ways to numb that emotional overwhelm that you're feeling. You might have difficulty concentrating. You might be kind of always on edge and irritable, and hyper arousal and hypervigilance is one of the keys of PTSD, key symptoms. As we talk about trauma, those are symptoms as a result of trauma. But it can get confusing and maybe unclear. Are you experiencing depression? Are you experiencing the result? Are you experiencing symptoms and behaviors as a result of one traumatic event, which we talked about, the capital T trauma?
Right.
Or is it that over a period of time, you might be exposed to having these many moments of feeling invisible or not good enough or shamed or feeling like you're feeling stupid or that you don't quite get it or feeling othered. Over time, all of those moments of kind of small T trauma still trigger your stress response system so that you are actually responding as if you were exposed to a terrible hurricane, earthquake, abuse, right? So your body's responding as if you had a big T trauma. So we talked about those two differences. Does that make sense?
Not only does it make sense, but I feel like somebody just threw open the curtains for me. I used to hate ordering my daughter's diabetes supplies. I never had a good experience and it was frustrating. But it hasn't been that way for a while, actually for about 3 years now, because that's how long we've been using US Med. usmed.com/juicebox or call 888-721-1514. US Med is the #1 distributor for Freestyle Libre systems nationwide. They are the #1 specialty distributor for Omnipod DASH, the #1 fastest growing tandem distributor nationwide, the #1 rated distributor in Dexcom customer satisfaction surveys. They have served over 1 million people with diabetes since 1996, and they always provide 90 days worth of supplies and fast and free shipping. US Med carries everything from insulin pumps and diabetes testing supplies to the latest CGMs like the Libre 3 and Dexcom G7. They accept Medicare nationwide and over 800 private insurers. Find out why US Med has an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau at usmed.com/juicebox or just call them at 888-721-1514. Dexcom G7 offers an easier way to manage diabetes without finger sticks. It is a simple CGM system that delivers real-time glucose numbers to your smartphone, your smartwatch, and it effortlessly allows you to see your glucose levels and where they're headed. My daughter is wearing a Dexcom G7 right now, and I can't recommend it enough. Whether you have commercial insurance, Medicare coverage, or no CGM coverage at all, Dexcom can help you. Go to my link, dexcom.com/juicebox, and look for that button that says Get a Free Benefits Check. That'll get you going with Dexcom. When you're there, check out the Dexcom Clarity app or the Follow. Did you know that people can follow your Dexcom? Up to 10 people can follow you. Right now, I'm following my daughter, but my wife is also following her. Her roommates at school are following her. So I guess Arden's being followed right now by 5 people who are concerned for her health and welfare. And you can do the same thing. School nurses, your neighbor, people in your family, everyone can have access to that information if you want them to have it. Or if you're an adult and you don't want anyone to know, you don't have to share with anybody. It's completely up to you. Dexcom.com/juicebox. Links in the show notes. Links at juiceboxpodcast.com. And when you use my link to learn about Dexcom, you're supporting the podcast. I'm being really genuine here. I was just having a conversation with a person whose details I'll keep very vague, but they experience a significant amount of anxiety. They're medicated for it. They had a situation where the medication went away for a little bit, and they told me they didn't realize how much the medication was helping them, because as soon as the medication went away, it was overwhelming. And this person doesn't think of themselves as depressed, but told me that in their medical folder, it says, I forget the exact phrasing, but it's something basically says, always sad. But they're not a sad person, but that's how the doctor sees them. Mm-hmm. They have this anxiety that they've been told they have. Without the medication, it's unmanageable. But when I think about what I know about their upbringing, mother using pills, a lot of craziness, and you're talking, and I think, God, is she not anxious? Is she not depressed? Is she just in a constant state of experiencing her younger life and waiting for it to happen again and again and again? Like, that's really interesting, actually.
Yes. Yeah. And because of her exposure to that in her childhood, she is sensitized to that and kind of more aware, more like maybe trying to anticipate and trying to protect her body and mind from experiencing those feelings. Like we said last time, I think the research and information out there from trauma is still new in terms of how we define it, understand it, and treat it, which is, it's really fascinating. And then when we look at it through the lens of diabetes, we talked about whether or not, let's say you grew up in a very predictable, safe environment as a child, then you are diagnosed. Then are you having these micro moments that feel like trauma because of how you're treated in the classroom or how you're treated by others, or the shame that you experience constantly, if you do, around your diagnosis and living with diabetes? Or is it what we talked about, the FFTs, from Brene Brown, the first time experience, which is what we do experience that as people living with diabetes or caregiving, where you're trying something new every time. And then you're having this expectation that you're supposed to kind of nail it because you did it, you nailed it yesterday. So I think that's where it's really kind of confusing and blurry. Are you experiencing some of those anxiety, depression? Is that diabetes distress? Is that diabetes burnout? Is your body responding as if it were a trauma,
right,
because of your past or not, right? So it's really blurry, and I think also really fascinating. And if someone wants to go do research on all of that, that would be awesome.
Yeah, I don't know how blurry it seems. I mean, it feels like it makes a lot of sense, and I can even see how it could look like resilience, because I'm going to use myself as an example. Like, I was around a lot of yelling, right? And it could be physical sometimes, not all that frequently. I'm trying to balance what the 70s was like compared to what I would want to do now for my kids. So, like, you got smacked more in the 70s, but it wasn't like a full-on assault. Do you know what I mean? If that makes sense. But I grew up like that. Like, people were, if you did something wrong, you got yelled at. There was a little bit of fear-mongering to, like, manage you. Like, right? There was always that, like, it's good if they're a little scared feeling. I think of myself as very resilient, but maybe I'm just always on alert because of that, but it's manageable for me, so I look resilient. If it wasn't manageable for me, I'd look anxious. Is that right?
Yes, because having a little bit of stress is helpful, and somewhere within, as we talked about last time, is it your genetics? Is it your family, generational resilience that is ingrained? But I guess that's also part of genetics. But somewhere in there, as you were exposed to stressful situations, you learned how to adapt and respond and overcome.
But that could be as easy as I just got lucky and conquered a couple of them. So I build up some confidence and then I have this expectation it's going to go well, etc. Can that look like, can I ask a weird question? I don't want to get too far off the path because I'm really interested in this conversation today, but could that look like narcissism? Can confidence look like narcissism when it's not narcissism? What's the difference between knowing you're good at something, being confident that it's going to go well, and actually being a narcissist? Is there a difference?
Oh, gosh. Yes. By the way, if you're interested in narcissism, there's a really good book I just was talking about recently called The Wizard of Oz and Other Narcissists. Just as there's So the question is, what's the difference between feeling confident and competent versus narcissism?
Yeah, if I was speed dating with Superman and he was like, listen, I'm very handsome, super strong, I look great in a bikini, fly, and you keep going on and on, he's just telling you the facts about his life. And like, so you know what I mean by that? Like, so
yes.
Go ahead.
Well, I think, narcissism is, is a personality disorder diagnosed by the fact that they're you're self-centered, you're preoccupied with your own needs at the expense of others. And so I would say when you're confident and competent in something, you're holding compassion and empathy.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas oftentimes with people with narcissism, they need the attention, they want people to admire them, but they really lack the empathy piece or compassion piece. So I think that would be the marker of the difference.
Perfect definition. I just wanted that out there for moving forward. That's
yes.
Great. Thank you. Okay. I'm sorry. Do you know where did I cut you off to the point you don't know where you were?
We're good.
Okay.
No, we're good.
Right.
So, so we're talking about these three different, is how I am envisioning it, is like these three different buckets, but they can also be layers of like this big T trauma, this kind of one event incident, these multiple moments of really feeling invisible. You experience that fear, the feeling of not accepted or not good enough. That can also lead to the trauma experience. And this third bucket of doing something for the first time, which you can have these moments of feeling doubtful, of anxious, of sadness, of loneliness. But over time, that doesn't necessarily lead to it's not triggering your stress response system so that you're having traumatic symptoms. Okay. So with that, I think if we're looking at going back to diabetes and understanding trauma as the way Brené Brown defines it, a situation or environment over which you have no control. Thinking about this from the context of, we feel like that all the time. You can feel like you have, like you do all the right things and then you still skyrocket or you still plummet with your blood sugars or you still experience the emotional toll. That can be feeling like you're in this constant traumatic state. And I was just envisioning, I know we've talked about your history, but imagine like if you grew up in chaos where stress was unpredictable, was uncontrollable, and then you had these kind of adaptive behaviors as a child to say, okay, I'm going to try and feel safe in this environment by trying to predict outcomes. I'm going to try and figure out how can I be safe? I'm going to try and control as much as I can, or at least tell myself I'm going to control as much as I can. I'm going to be a people pleaser and avoid conflict. Those were all adaptive behaviors as a child to feel safe. Then you get diagnosed with diabetes. And I think I feel like I see this and I hear this a lot on your podcast as well. It's like, how could you not, I'm just thinking about this question of how could you not go into a shame spiral or experiencing severe anxiety, depression, if you feel like you can control things, right? And then you get diagnosed, and you're like, oh my gosh, not only am I out of control with this diagnosis, but then feeling that sense of out of control, particularly in the new, first year or when life changes, you experience those kind of like you're feeling out of control. You thought you could control everything. And then consequently, you're experiencing these kind of traumatic moments. I thought that was important to kind of note and reflect on.
Yeah.
And so if you're listening and you're hearing that, I think it's really important to understand, like, what's the story? What's fueling this response and this behavior? Is it just the diabetes? Usually it's not. Is it your childhood trauma? Is it all the other things going on in life that are feeling unpredictable and scary and overwhelming? And then you felt like you could live a life trying to be in control, and then you realize you aren't.
And you could live your whole life having impacts from this and not have any idea what it stemmed from. And just thinking, I'm an anxious person. Or because I hear people say it all the time, like, I'm just an anxious person.
Yeah.
Right. Or I don't know. I just am always expecting the worst thing to happen, blah, blah, blah. But I've tried this a number of times. And when I'm making the podcast, I'll say to somebody who says something like that, I'm like, were your parents alcoholics? And a lot of people will say yes, because alcoholism is pretty common. And so like they'll say yes, and then they don't understand the connection between it at all. And then you say a little bit of like, some of the things you've just mentioned, like, always being on alert, or things being so like, haphazard. One minute everything's fine, the next minute it's not. Is that exact explanation of what anxiety is? Like that, trying to be ready for something that you have no idea if or when it will ever come. That's anxiety, right?
Yes.
And
yes.
Yeah. And so if it's always looming, whether it's really there or not, you're still going to feel that way. And then I think the part you don't get is like, even if it's not, like, let's say it just doesn't exist in your life anymore, but you still have the response. You come off strangely to your spouse or to your family, who then wants to know, why are you acting so strangely? And then you don't know you're acting strangely. And then these weird interpersonal, like, underlying issues come, and they build on top of each other and build on top of each other until you're in these problems and you don't understand how you got there. And now I'm trying to imagine on top of that, you have that feeling already, and then you or your kid gets a chronic illness. Holy hell, I knew it was coming. Erika, I knew it. Mm-hmm. Here it is. And then your body rewards you by giving you more anxiety because see, this was really valuable for us. I told you something bad was coming. Like, is that kind of is that the path it takes?
It can. I mean, and that's part of, anxiety connects to a lot of the distortions you were just talking about, right? Like the magical thinking or the catastrophic thinking. That's worst case scenario thinking. And the trick we talk about in my practice, that anxiety lies to you and says, well, be prepared, because you never know what's going to happen.
Right.
And you think that that's going to reduce the pain if and when something bad happens. But no one has ever said, gosh, I'm so glad I worried about this thing happening, because when it happened, I was so much more prepared. It didn't feel as bad.
Yes, that never happens. Fear is a waste of imagination, is what it ends up being. But anxiety is different than fear, right?
Yeah. I mean, they can be connected, but yes.
Yeah, but not to dig too deep into it, but you can find reasonable things to be like, that's a scary thing. I should know how to unlock my car in case I have an accident. I have a seatbelt cutter and a thing that breaks the window. I'm like, oh, that sounds like anxiety to me. But if you had a car accident as a young person, or someone was able to market to your anxiety properly, I could make anything sound necessary. I mean, a good salesman could sell you anything. I don't know. This is all just I don't know if I'm being articulate enough, but I think that many people listening to this can say, oh, wow, I did have either large T, small t, first time trauma in my life as a child. I can see now that that is still something I'm worried about. And then you have to make the leap to believe that underlying anxiety is coming from that. I bet you there's a fair amount of people who think what you're talking about is hocus pocus. Like, you know what I mean? Like, like therapy and talking about your past. There's plenty of people who are like, just get over it. I don't know that that's a thing you'd even know was happening to you to get over, if that makes sense.
Yes, I think it's important, I believe, obviously in my profession, to understand why you're doing or thinking a certain way. And sometimes it's because of what happened to you yesterday. But most of the time, it's about what happened in the past and how your core, your neuro pathways, your stress system, everything was formed And you don't have to spend years looking back at all of that,
Sure.
right? But I think it's important to spend a little time to look back and say, oh, all these things happened. That's why when I hear this sound or smell that thing, or someone says this thing to me, or I have to prick my finger, I experience these things.
Right.
Okay.
I get worried as we're talking about it that some people see themselves as so autonomous and conscious that they don't think about anything that happened before. It's this, the wind blew, I squinted, I made that decision. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I am only who I am right now. I'm not a collection of the things that have happened to me in the past. But today's podcast is sponsored by the Eversense CGM. Boasting a 6-month sensor, the Eversense CGM offers you these key advantages: distinct on-body vibe alerts when high or low, a consistent and exceptional accuracy over a 6-month period, and you only need 2 sensors per year. No longer will you have to carry your CGM supplies with you. You won't have to be concerned about your adhesive not lasting, accidentally knocking off a sensor, or wasting a sensor when you have to replace your transmitter. That's right, there's no more weekly or bi-weekly hassles of sensor changes, not with the Eversense CGM. It's implantable, and it's accurate. EversenseCGM.com/juicebox. The Eversense CGM is the first and only long-term CGM. Eversense sits comfortably right under the skin in your upper arm, and it lasts way longer than any other CGM sensor. Never again will you have to worry about your sensor falling off before the end of its life. So if you want an incredibly accurate CGM that can't get knocked off and won't fall off, you're looking for the Eversense CGM. EversenseCGM.com/juicebox. And I do think I think a lot of people believe that. I think a lot of people think therapy's meaningless because of those beliefs. And if you feel that way, that's great. But listen to what she's saying here about you can all trace your life back a little bit and see moments where you're like, oh my God, that did happen to me, or that was scary. And so if you're one of those people who says like, I don't like being told what to do, that's a great one, right? You ever hear people say that very proudly? I don't like being told what to do, and you're like, well, yeah, it's because somebody controlled you, at some point along the ways. And this is you trying to keep that from happening again. But there's also somebody out there who likes to be told what to do. And we're probably being controlled the exact same way, but for reasons I don't know, it was comfortable to them instead of off-putting. And I don't know. I think what you just said about knowing yourself and knowing why you feel the way you feel, I think that's at the core of anyone's ability to live a healthy and comfortable life. But, get a podcast, talk about yourself constantly. You'll figure it out pretty quick.
Oh my gosh.
Okay.
Well, yes. Okay. So, and just on that last thought on that point, it can feel scary, and you might not even know if you do have a sense of what is causing or driving some of your thoughts, behaviors, that it can feel scary to do that and say, there's no point in opening that box. But you also might not even know what's there.
Sure.
And that can also be overwhelming.
Yeah.
Or scary.
Can I tell you the briefest story, and then you can just move on. I'll let you go. I just put an episode up last week. It's called After Dark Prison. Female in her 30s, mother of a few kids, and we spent an hour and a half laying out her life. Like, she came on because she had been to prison with type 1 diabetes, and I wanted to hear about that. But the interview just went so well. I'm proud of it. It went so well. And we basically dug through her early life of a lot of verbal abuse from her parents, from her dad, and no defense from her mom. And eventually she ends up in foster care. And then there she meets other people who were not treated well. And now they have the Justice League of foster care kids. So now they can break more rules and do more things. And they're all stunted at some point in their life, right? They're all kind of frozen at wherever their trauma happened. She gets out of foster care, has babies. The state takes a baby from her. Big trauma, right? Then she has more kids with a person who she shouldn't have been with. And then he's a criminal. And then she becomes a criminal. And then she defrauds the government somehow, gets caught, gets thrown in jail for 2 years. During jail times, treated terribly with her diabetes, on and on and on and on. And I hope when people listen to that story, I mean, you can hear it any way you want to. And I'm not saying she didn't make decisions along the way that she could have made better. She absolutely could have. But if you look at her as a whole story and not just a caricature of a person who's been in jail, somebody abused her when she was little, and it sent her on a path. And then she met more abusive people. And to the point where she said at one point, she thought because she knew how to vacuum and clean, she was better than the other people that she knew. That was her Mendoza line for success. She's like, I know how to vacuum and clean. And I'm like, oh my God, like no one taught her anything once, ever. And now you look at her in her 30s and you want to be able to, and people want to judge her. They want to go look at her and go like, geez, yeah, there's no resilience here. She gave up everywhere along the way, broke every rule she could. She didn't work hard. She didn't do anything like that. Yes. But what if someone would have been kind to her when she was 4? Like, you know what I mean? Like, and that's a bigger, more kind of ham-fisted example, but some version of some of that happens to a lot of people. And maybe it doesn't end up with you in jail. Maybe it just ends up with you in a personal, relationship where it's always just a little contentious and you don't really know why, or something like that. Like, I just think that that's important to know that what happened to her on some level or another probably happens to almost everybody. And all the things that we've talked about in the past so far, your genetic makeup, the situation you're in, the privilege you have of being loved by somebody, because what a difference it would be to have a car accident as a 7-year-old and be surrounded by supportive people, or have that same car accident and not have support, and then let that trauma tumble away and suck you down some sort of siphon. Anyway.
Yes.
Yeah, I feel like I don't have any clear thoughts on this, but I feel like I have a ton of them and I don't know how to put them together, if that makes sense or not.
Yes.
Yeah.
I get that.
Okay.
Because it's so rich and intense and important, but it's hard to lay it out in a very clear, clean outline. So I think we're trying to figure our way through here.
I just hope that people listening can do it for themselves, because what this really is, in my mind, is a star map. Like, you're the planet in the middle, and all of these other points of light around you have pushed you, pulled you, influenced you, helped you, hurt you, loved you, not loved you along the way. And those are all the reasons why you are who you are. And then we meet people as adults and we say stuff like, she's a bitch. It's not that simple, right? Right now, it's not my job to fix you. But it should be, oh God, I'm going to sound like a hippie. It should be our jobs to at least look at people and say, there might be a really good reason that this is happening. And why don't I try not to be one more reason for this to go wrong for them? You can say it any way you want, like be the bigger person or whatever, but when it all comes down to it, I followed David Foster Wallace's advice. When somebody cuts me off, I assume they got to go to the bathroom. They're not just being a jerk. They're probably just being a jerk, Erika, but it doesn't help me to feel that way. So I just give everyone the benefit of the doubt.
I love that, because that's you just answered the question. There's a story. What's the story fueling the behavior is what I think either Brene Brown or Dr. Perry usually asks. There's always something underneath.
And that story is very important to you as you're figuring out your thing. But to the outside world looking in, my perspective is it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if they have a good reason for being like this or not. It doesn't benefit you to walk around thinking that everybody's a piece of shit all the time. Like, it's just, it's hard on you. You know what I mean? Like, and why do we want to assume that people are bad on purpose? That's a weird thing, because some people don't feel that way. Right? So even that's an impulse from a variable from your past, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I could mumble about this forever. So go ahead.
Yes, me too.
Yeah.
Okay. I was just looking up I think we could maybe transition into talking about the ACEs, which I just was looking up the time. It was developed, ACEs are adverse childhood experiences, developed in 1995 by researchers Vincent Valetti, Robert Anda, and their colleagues at the Center for Disease and Control.
Mm-hmm.
Centers
for Disease Control.
So thank you. And this is a tool that they started implementing and using. It didn't gain traction until a few years ago. I think we talked about that. And it's a questionnaire. You could look it up right now and take it, but it's for questions for adults, so 18 and over. But they're asking you if you experienced any of these 10 bad things before the age of 18. And these are things like, consistent conflict in the household, divorce, abuse, addiction, neglect. And from the recent data, they have discovered that 60% of the population, of the adult population, has experienced at least one of these things before the age of 18.
Jesus, really?
Yes. 30% of the population has at least 3 or more. And what they discovered from these results is that the higher the score, the more risk there is for health disease, mental health problems, relationship issues, etc.
Can I read them real quick?
Yeah. Please, read them. I just kind of summarized. Go ahead.
Physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, emotional neglect, physical neglect, parental separation or divorce, mother treated violently, substance abuse, mental illness, incarceration.
Okay.
How many people have 3 or more?
Over 60%, 30% have 3 or more. 60% have at least one. So when we talk about, I think maybe it's important to talk about the ACEs in conjunction with this idea of growing up feeling safe and secure.
Mm-hmm.
So if you grew up in a household that the stress, the pattern of stress was predictable, it was controllable, it was more moderate, that is a privilege in general. Not like, we're not talking about capital P privilege. That is a privilege. And that pattern of stress that was moderate, controllable, leads to more resilience, because like we talked about in the previous episodes in the parenting series as well,
mm-hmm.
you experience a little bit of stress and then you come back to a safe and loving parental figure, and that's how you develop the resilience. And because of that, then your stress response system is more regulated. And that leads to, as Dr. Perry says, a cascade of secondary and tertiary benefits, because you're more capable of managing stress. So now if we think about that household and then juxtapose it with, if you grew up in a household where you had 1 or 3 or more of these adverse childhood experiences,
mm-hmm.
you are at greater risk to develop these other issues, health issues, mental health issues, relationship issues, problems with your profession. And what one study from the Department of Health and Human Services found that while all children are at risk of ACEs, numerous studies showed inequities in these experiences. And these inequities are linked to the historical, social, and economic environments in which some families live. So that's where this conversation around environment, your family, is it a privilege, but then also is connected to how you were able to develop resilience. But also it's important to note that even children who were exposed to a lot of these ACEs, they also showed, I don't have the numbers here, but had a lot of people demonstrated resilience despite these ACEs.
Yeah. So it doesn't befall everybody and ruin them, but
yes,
it certainly could. And also you have to start thinking about the numbers inside of the numbers. Like, I listed 10 things, but then go ask yourself, like, how many people have mental illness and how many people experience spousal abuse, or how many people, and you start looking at if there's 10 options and each option has a fairly big percentage of likelihood, then the likelihood that you're covered by a number of these is significant. Or at least, I looked at it. I've got a couple of these from growing up. Would you mind? We never talk about you, but do you have any of them?
Let me look at the list again. Probably.
Physical, emotional, sexual, emotional neglect, physical neglect, separation, divorce, mother treated violently, substance abuse, mental illness, incarceration.
Not clinically. I would have to say
I grew up in a lady. No,
I definitely had a very predictable, controllable household.
Yeah.
Then there's the diabetes factor, right? Which happened younger, but anyway, I'm going to pause there.
Also, there are significant impacts from having a chronic illness too. So you could just find problems in a different spot. Like, so even if you grew up, luckily, what you call privilege, I call luck, like in this context, right? If you luckily did not experience any of these things and you still got type 1 diabetes, there you go. Like, there's your big T right there, followed by a whole lot of baby T's coming forever and ever and ever with low blood sugars and, here's your juice box, do this, don't forget your meter, like all these other little things that we think of as not just important because they are, not just safety things because they are, but they're I think of them as like little dings on your soul. You know what I mean? Like over and over again. Like you're trying to leave the house, you're running out the door, you're feeling like a real person. And then somebody looks at you and goes, don't forget your kit. Oh yeah, I have diabetes. I grab this bag. You know what I mean? Like, hey, you're going to go play at the park? That's great. Hold on. What's your blood sugar before you go? Like that. Like ding, ding, ding. You know what I mean? Just gets you over and over and over again. Little bits, which is to say, like, I wouldn't stop doing that if I was a parent. I mean, I try not to be overbearing about it. You can't just forget that you have diabetes, but there's that, I don't know what the feeling here is though, is, you come out of the womb and hopefully you're at 100%, you know what I mean? And then something happens and sometimes you dip down and you get to come back up again, right? You get a cold, you fight the cold, you come back up again. But some things you get and you never can reascend all the way. And if you start having a number of those things happen to you, that's the pressure and the weight of life, right? Like I can't get out from under these things that have happened to me. And then you get these little bits here and here. My friend of mine struggling just to get their CGMs right now, having these long arguments and conversations on the phone, arguing with insurance companies and going back and forth. And you think, oh, big deal. You have insurance. You're lucky. You'll get them. But after hours on the phone, having to say to somebody, give me this thing that, you know what? I don't really want. I just need it. Like, you know what I mean? Like, so I need this thing. You're telling me I can't have it. I've explained to you 1,000 times I have diabetes. I've had diabetes for years. You know I have diabetes. Why do I have to reprove it to you? Like, why do I have to sit down and go over it again? Like, why do I have to relive the fact that I have diabetes with you to get this thing that I don't really want, I just need? And that, I'm telling you, takes a little piece away. And if you're lucky, you can rebound. You know what I mean?
Yes, yeah. But even let's say you don't have any of the ACEs or major T traumas, but that scenario that you just described over and over and over again, whether you're the person living with it or a caregiver, that is stressful and triggering your stress response system.
Sure.
And that's over time, that does become the big T trauma. And so I just wanted to, I know we've said that, but I think it's important to really highlight that is as if you had this one event.
But it's also a good example for why, like, all of a sudden you lose your shit on a neighbor who's like, can you eat that? And you're like, you know what? Here we go. Like, like, I'm going to let it all out right here because you don't know that's going to happen. Like, you know what I mean? Like, with just one day, it's just too much and it just tips the other way. What's that? Slowly I Turn. What's that old movie? And like, so like, I don't know. I'm now referencing things I haven't even seen. Like that kind of push you over the edge moment. And I don't think that, like, people don't just go off half-cocked. They have these little things that happen that build up. And then, like you said, all of a sudden, it all gets pressed together into a ball. You can't tell one little trauma from the other one. It's just this horrible feeling I have now that exists because I have diabetes or because something else happened to me that I can't, like, and then I look over here and this person's got all these same problems too. And they seem completely resilient and they're just smiling and tripping through life going, oh, what are some of the lessons you've learned from diabetes? F you. Like, I always hear that conversation and I'm like, I believe in it. I don't want to go down the wrong rabbit hole. Like, I believe in it. I believe that I am better off because my daughter has type 1. I also believe that I would be happy to give away all the things that I'm better off about if she didn't have it. I think she's better off too. I do think she's more resilient and blah, blah, blah. But if I was a piece of shit and she didn't, that resiliency wouldn't have come to her. It would have been something else. And then she'd be running around going, no, there's nothing good that's come from diabetes. Then two people online argue with each other all day long about it.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, no, there's plenty to learn from type 1. I don't care. I have all these problems. Like, again, it's those little like points of light that surround you that changed your perspective and their perspective. Your planet's pointing one way and theirs is pointing another way. And that's where all these little arguments come from all the time. When I see people arguing about, you know what? If you want people with type 1 diabetes to argue, Erika, go on Facebook and say, hey, how do I get a disability pass at Disney?
Oh, I've been seeing those conversations. Yeah.
We're not disabled. Yes, we are. No, we're not. Yes, we are. I can't stand up that long. My blood sugar gets low. Yes, you can. I ran a marathon back and forth and back and forth. And I just want to get in the middle of it and go, stop. Why does it matter? She needs the pass. You don't. Move on. All right. But it's not that easy because of all of this shit that you are telling me about that's freaking me out. Like, this conversation is freaking me out. Like, just so you know. I'm so sorry. Go, ACEs, where were you going to go?
So ACEs, I think we're talking about, when you experience it, how you experience it. Also, I think it's important to not only talk about what happened to you, but also what didn't happen, like what was not there that you maybe needed, which was that safe and secure environment. And what you're talking about is, Dr. Perry says, your ability to enjoy the world and enjoy others is related to how regulated you are, which is directly related to what happened to you. Mm-hmm. Because are you operating from a place where you feel safe and secure? Are you operating from a place that you're constantly aware and wanting to respond and fight or flight or protect yourself? And when we were talking about, if you feel safe and secure, then you're also able to be more curious and go out and explore the world. And I was thinking about this in terms of how you manage the diabetes, right? Because some people leave the hospital with their pump and their CGM on, or at least mostly their CGM. Some people aren't able to do that. There's all different reasons why. And then some people are more comfortable saying, okay, we're going to switch from injection to pump, or we're going to go eat this thing on day 5, or we're not. And I also, from this kind of framework of trauma, I was thinking about, is that related? If you're under threat, you feel under threat, you aren't very curious, or you aren't feeling very confident in trying new things. But if you are from either historically, from your family of origin, or even present day, feeling safe, secure, are you then able to make those jumps or try new things in terms of your management? I don't know. I just thought it was an interesting point to think about.
My son's looking for a job right now. And I said, hey, listen, I just wanted to tell you, I think this is all going to work out for you. If you're feeling worried or like pressure or anything like that, I don't think you should. And he goes, I don't feel that way. And I was like, so I go, not at all. And he goes, no, I know you guys got me. And I was like, oh, okay. That was it. It's the same thing you're talking about in a slightly different context. Like he's like, no, it'll be all right. I know it'll be all right. But he doesn't know it'll be all right. He believes it because we set up a safe, secure, loving place for him to live and to grow up. And his experience is that things work out. Not always quickly, but in the end. Yeah, so he can take risks, and because he turned a job down because he was like, this isn't what I want to do. And it wasn't like one of, I don't know, what generation are these kids now? I have no idea. I don't keep track of that stuff. Like, I don't know if I'm an X or a millennial. I don't know what I am.
What year was he born?
2000.
Let's see. That is, Gen Z. He's Gen Z, technically.
It seems to me like that's a statement where people would be like, yeah, well, his generation, like, they don't care about this, like, blah, blah, blah. Like, it's not like that. He has a plan. He is going to execute the plan. There's certain experiences he has to get from jobs. He was offered a job, and it would have just been a job. He would not have been able to get the experience. And he has the luxury. Oh my God, Erika, he has the privilege to say no to that job because he knows the next one will come along. Whereas when I was his age, it would not have mattered what job you offered me. I would have said yes, and I would have taken it. Like literally, I worked I've worked in sheet metal shops. I've collected credit card debts. I've cut lawns. Anybody who stood in front of me and said, if you show up here at this time, I'll pay you. I was like, okay. And I was there, and I did not have any privilege, obviously. Okay. Interesting. All right.
I think, one thing I will share, you asked me about my ACEs. When I think about my family history in relation to trauma, I was just thinking about, I was diagnosed at age 12. 2 years later, my brother was diagnosed with type 1 when he was 10. Mm-hmm. And then a year later, our house burned down in the Laguna Beach firestorm. Wow. So there were lots of houses. When I think about my parents, I'm like, that was a lot for them to endure. Mm-hmm. And we got through it. There was a sense of like resilience, like this is hard, but it was maybe leaning more so into like, we can do this, and not as much space for like grief, which is probably why I do what I do now. But I think about my dad and all that he endured, had a lot of trauma growing up and built a lot of resilience in response to that. Mm-hmm. And leaned into the like, we can do this mindset. And so I think there's going back to like, why is it important to look back as to how you operate today? Your history is rich with evidence.
Right. So, Erika, so if you're hit with something that requires resilience and you have it, then you get a story like your dad's. But if you're hit with something and you don't have it, are you doomed? Or can you recognize it and go back and find these things? I mean, I know you believe that that's possible, or you probably wouldn't do what you do for a living. But what's the step there? Like, if you're listening to this right now and you go, I am anxious all the time, and there is no reason for it. And I heard a couple of those things in that ACEs list. I did live through that. And then my kid got diabetes, and oh my God, I feel like this. What do you do? Like, you know what I mean? Like, what do you do then? Like, because listening to a podcast isn't going to fix it. Like, it might make you aware of it, but it's not. Mm-hmm. There are some people who say if you give something voice, it does clear it, which I have seen work for some people. But for a lot of people, you're going to need help, right?
Yes. I mean, that what you just said, that's part of what therapy is speaking something out, separating yourself from that. But if that's part of your narrative, you don't even understand why. Yeah. And how that is impacting you, just by speaking it out in the presence of someone else to hear it and validate it, and then help you differentiate your story from your past, your current story.
Can you tell me what's the significance of saying it in front of another person?
Oh, for it to know that to recognize that it actually happened, that there is pain in that story, to be heard and validated in a objective way. Mm-hmm. So I'm not going to be saying, well, you should have done that, or of course, like, why wouldn't that happen that way? It's just giving space to something that happened to you by speaking it out in the presence of an objective listener is therapeutic, because you are able to just simply be validated that happened is the biggest first therapeutic tool, right? To say, wow, that sounds like it was really intense.
Oh my God, that's the Catholic confession. That's I guess the basis of that idea. So, okay. So here I am in 2024, realizing something that I guess people have known for hundreds of years, but nevertheless, or longer. But so just saying it out loud to somebody who will just hear it, because you can't just say it to yourself. You can't go into a room and be like, I murdered a hobo. Like, that doesn't make it go. I don't know why I said that. That's because I think it sounds funny, and I know that that's not. Like, Friday night I went out, I got crazy, I did some coke, and I killed a vagrant. Like, you can't say that in a room and make it go away. And not that you could ever make, obviously, murdering a person going away. This is a big example I shouldn't have made. But like, if you go in and sit with a priest and say, look, I did this thing, it alleviates some of it. Saying it to yourself doesn't make it go away. Saying it to somebody else does make it go away. Also, I believe if you say something like that to a priest, they do encourage you to turn yourself into the police. If I went
is that from personal experience?
And I think it's an episode of MASH I saw, but okay. All right. No, but if I go to you and I say, Erika, what happens there? What's your legal? I know this is a weird turn, but if I go to you and I say, hey, I think I killed somebody with my car the other night, I'm not sure. Where does the legality lie?
There's TerraSoft rule, which is I am mandated to report you if you come in and tell me that you are thinking about harming somebody, and then you've identified who that person is. I would have to then report that. If it's in the past, I think
if it was in the past.
Kind of conditional. Yeah, it kind of depends.
Interesting. Oh, all right. Okay. This all seems important to me for reasons that I can't exactly put together right now. But like what I'm trying to like peel apart here is for people who don't see the value in going and talking to somebody, like what does that accomplish for them? You put it into words. I still think it's a little nebulous for people listening. Like, but I know for sure that saying it out loud is very valuable. Like I'm 100% certain about that.
Yes. I mean, it decreases your isolation from that experience, any kind of shame, or you've lived in a space where you've kind of minimized it, where people might come in and tell me stories and I'll say, that is significant trauma, like not overused trauma, but real trauma. And
they're like, no, my mom just liked to hold a hot pan on my arm. Right. Like that kind of thing. Gotcha. Okay.
Yes. And so it's bringing to life pain that you've been carrying, and then learning how to grieve, heal from it eventually, right? But just by speaking it out loud in the presence of someone who can be an objective listener and validate it is so powerful for the human spirit, because you might not know how to validate it for yourself or even know that it needs attention, right? Until you speak it out.
Do you need the forgiveness piece? Does somebody have, because you don't offer forgiveness to people, right?
Most people, no. I mean, that's their journey, right? If someone is living in a space of shame and guilt for whatever reason, that's their journey. And sometimes it looks like forgiveness. Sometimes it looks more like acceptance. Forgiveness is a complicated concept also to be worked on and addressed in therapy.
Because I guess you would contextualize what they did, which might lead them to be able to accept it, which could look like forgiveness, and maybe just make them feel a little better. But then you got to go, wow, all this stuff. I never really thought about how like 12 steps or, all these other, like they all have little pieces of unburdening yourself in there. Interesting. Huh. Wow. It's very complicated being a person. It's insanely complicated. I'm sorry. Is there something else you want to talk about
I think we can maybe, do we pause there? We can go into the, classic PTSD, but maybe I don't know what our timing is like. Save that for next time.
Okay. Yeah, I'm happy to, oh, I see your part here. Yeah. This was a big part 3.
Yes.
And then I got chatty in the middle and screwed that up for you. Well, I mean, yeah, we'll just do it next time. We'll just do PTSD and chronic illness in our next conversation. That's all.
Yeah, I think in general, we're from today understanding, I think, that how are you experiencing, or are you experiencing trauma, and in what capacity? Were you exposed to one of these adverse childhood experiences? And if so, and I think your question going back to like, what do you do about it? With, you're realizing, gosh, I did have an ACE, or I am, or I didn't, but I'm experiencing these trauma symptoms.
Yeah.
And I think understanding what people are like, well, where do you start? Oftentimes people come into therapy, they're like, I don't know where to start. I think it can be important to look at, okay, what are your current stressors? And then moving out, what are your social support systems? What is your family of origin story?
Yeah.
And when you're experiencing anxiety, it also can feel anxious. You can feel anxiety around how do I understand the root cause of everything? But also that's part of what, your therapist or anyone else that you're, I'm thinking about, mentioned confession, or even, a church person,
right,
a counselor, there should be trained to help you navigate and then start making connections. But even now, if you're experiencing anxiety and you're like, what do? I can't go to therapy. I don't have time for all these other things. understanding, going back to some of our coping tools, right? Like that you can Google anything around grounding exercises, deep breathing, going back to the basics of learning how to regulate your body physically is a great place to start.
Yeah. It occurs to me that as we talk in modern times about, there's so many more anxious people now. I always think like there's probably no more anxious people now than there was before. I just think maybe we talk about it more. Also, we've made a couple of things in life verboten that people were clearly using to, like smoking, for example, right? Like we have significantly quelled cigarette smoking, but how many people were managing their anxiety with cigarette smoking? Probably a lot. And now all of a sudden, a person who before wouldn't have seen themselves as anxious is probably like, no, I'm very anxious. Or, you know what I mean? Like there's things like that as society changes, shines lights on other ideas. Now, maybe there are more people with anxiety than there were in the past. I have no idea. I'm not looking, but this is as deep as I'm going to look into it, is to wonder out loud. It just does occur to me that we are in a societal moment now where people are also not as embarrassed to say something's not going well. When it's spoken about colloquially, you'll hear people say, I've said it before, like everybody wants a diagnosis. Like everybody wants to say they have a thing now all of a sudden. Like I've never seen adults walking around going like, I think I'm this or I think I'm that. I'm like, oh my God, like, okay. Like so many people, it feels like they want to identify their problem somehow. Like, right? Like I want to give a name to my problem. But I think it probably would be more valuable to give a voice to what got you to the problem than just to say, oh, I have this, see, and then that be the end of it. You know what I mean?
Right. And there's interesting conversation around, the DSM, the diagnosis manual, and even the ACE study. There are critics of these things because then it's saying, okay, well, great. You have 5 ACEs and now we can identify you as having PTSD. That's great. But we want to understand how can we help heal these people and understand.
Not just paint them and then go, okay, well, go away. You have this now. Like, right? Like, yeah, I want to get past this idea. Are there people walking around who have been through those ACEs who legitimately don't have life struggles? Or is it impossible to have those things happen to you and not be impacted by them?
I don't know if I could, I wish I could give you like a study, but I mean, I think that in general, the research has shown that, yes, you certainly can be exposed to these ACEs and succeed. And you've demonstrated resilience. You've overcame that adversity. But then there's also the data that says, well, that also can really impact your mental health, your physical health, your overall functioning. Yeah. But I think going back to the question of are there more people with anxiety, or are we just having that conversation and diagnosing more is a complicated one. I know we've kind of talked about this a little bit in past episodes. I think that the beauty of it though is normalizing the experience that people are. I think there probably is more anxiety based on a lot of things like the internet and social media, and even just thinking about with diabetes. When you were diagnosed, like I was 30 years ago, you could hide it, and you didn't have any beeps or things on your body. And consequently, I didn't have any teachers telling me like who's ringing, who's beeping, or kids, everyone, you beep and all the kids look at you in the classroom and you have that micro moment of like, oh, I'm different.
Right.
I didn't have any of that.
Even your health, you can kick the can down the road because it's not hurting you in the moment. So you don't even see it. Yeah. It's interesting.
And so now with the all this technology, there's psychological implications of caregivers looking at the numbers all day. My mom had no idea what my number was until she would download my CGM or look at my, fake logbook.
Fake logbook. I was 142.
Right. There are opportunities for our anxiety to be triggered more so. And we're talking about it more and we're understanding what it looks like more.
Yeah. Gotcha. Okay. Well, I appreciate this as always. I don't know, I'm fascinated by all this and looking at the different pathways that you could end up where you are. And I also am very cognizant of the idea that like there are some people who are like, I don't end up somewhere, I make choices to get places. And then there are people who are like, I don't have any of these problems. And maybe they don't. Like maybe some of them don't, but maybe some of them do and just think they don't. And in the end, if you're happy, is that enough? Like, at what point do you want to just live your life and not be working on your life? There's just a lot of interesting questions for people to ask themselves in here. And I think just by talking back and forth like this, you allow them to wonder what those questions are, Anyway, I appreciate it very much.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah. Hold on one second. A huge thanks to Dexcom for supporting the podcast and for sponsoring this episode. Dexcom.com/juicebox. Go get yourself a Dexcom G7 right now using my link. A huge thanks to US Med for sponsoring this episode of the Juicebox Podcast. Don't forget, usmed.com/juicebox. This is where we get our diabetes supplies from. You can as well. Use the link or call 888-721-1514. Use the link or call the number, get your free benefits check so that you can start getting your diabetes supplies the way we do from US Med. I want to thank the Eversense CGM for sponsoring this episode of the Juicebox Podcast. Learn more about its implantable sensor, smart transmitter, and terrific mobile application at eversensecgm.com/juicebox. Get the only implantable sensor for long-term wear. Get Eversense. If you or a loved one was just diagnosed with type 1 diabetes and you're looking for some fresh perspective, the Bold Beginnings series from the Juicebox Podcast is a terrific place to start. That series is with myself and Jenny Smith. Jenny is a CDCES, a registered dietitian, and a type 1 for over 35 years. And in the Bold Beginnings series, Jenny and I are going to answer the questions that most people have after a type 1 diabetes diagnosis. The series begins at episode 698 in your podcast player, or you can go to juiceboxpodcast.com and click on Bold Beginnings in the menu. I know that Facebook has a bad reputation, but please give the private Facebook group for the Juicebox Podcast a healthy once-over. Juicebox Podcast, Type 1 Diabetes. The group now has 47,000 members in it. It gets 150 new members a day. It is completely free. And at the very least, you can watch other people talk about diabetes. And everybody is welcome. Type 1, type 2, gestational, loved ones, everyone is welcome. Go up into the featured tab of the private Facebook group, and there you'll see lists upon lists of all of the management series that are available to you for free in the Juicebox Podcast. Becoming a member of that group, I really think it will help you. It will at least give you community. You'll be able to kind of lurk around, see what people are talking about, pick up some tips and tricks. Maybe you can ask a question or offer some help. Juicebox Podcast, Type 1 Diabetes on Facebook. If you're not already subscribed or following in your favorite audio app, please take the time now to do that. It really helps the show. And get those automatic downloads set up so you never miss an episode. Thank you so much for listening. I'll be back very soon with another episode of the Juicebox Podcast. The episode you just heard was professionally edited by Wrong Way Recording. WrongWayRecording.com.